Hi everyone. So firstly, I done a live stream last night for those who joined in. Apologies for the disruption. It was a Wi-Fi issue. Someone, I believe it was you, Ray Oric, asked about the connection. It's a Sky Wi-Fi. Honestly, I don't know why it does this. Some evenings it's fine, and some evenings it's unstable. So apologies for that interruption. I'll probably try and do the live streams more at daytime, henceforth. Um, so this video kind of seems timely, partly because of the political situation that we're in this country, and partly just I feel like it. If you've just come across my channel, welcome. And this is kind of just to reflect on what I'm about and what my positions are at present. My username is Centrist Philosopher. Now, the philosopher bit's a little bit tongue in cheek. I'm not so vain that I actually think I'm a philosopher. It just sounds good, honestly. Centrist bit though is more accurate because I do see myself as politically in the centre. I think this is a idea that is sometimes misunderstood. I think there's this perception that people who are on the center ground of things just don't have strong views, and it's just about sitting on the fence and agreeing with everyone. Absolutely not. Centrists can have very strong views on things, and I certainly do. Centrists can be to the center right or the center left. It's not that easy to define political centrism, but I would say probably it's that you cannot necessarily be pigeonholed one way or the other, in the sense that I'm not saying pigeonholing is good, by the way, but someone who is very comfortable in their socialist skin or someone who is very comfortable in their conservative skin will generally have predictable views on a wide range of issues. Centrists are less predictable to pin down because I'll give you an example. They may hold a traditionally left wing viewpoint, which might be, for example, focus on rehabilitation with crime and justice. Then they might also be very much in favor of free market economics, which should be more conservative. That's why they would gravitate to the center because they're not dogmatically socialist or conservative overall. That's how I describe it. On my own views, I will say this, I'm 37, I'm a millennial, an older millennial now, but in some ways, I've perhaps become a little bit more conservative as I've got older. Churchill made that famous statement that at least is associated with him, whether he actually said it or not is another matter. But he famously said, "A young man who isn't a liberal doesn't have a heart, and an older man who's not a conservative doesn't have a brain." Now, read into that what you will. Um, I don't think I was ever really a radical any political persuasion, but certainly I remember in my late teens I was probably more left wing overall, although I was always conservative on the issue of crime and justice, always. But at that time, my worldview was definitely more left wing. I was very critical of the war in Iraq. I still think, history has vindicated that position. I think it was a foreign policy disaster. But in the time since then, I've realized it's not quite as black and white as sometimes that sort of situation is made out to be. Saddam was a genocidal dictator, and definitely my worldview has become much more pro-West. I was never anti-West, but I'm very comfortable with my worldview at the moment. Then I was more undecided, perhaps. It's not necessarily that I was left-wing, but I was finding my feet, and now I am very comfortable with my worldview. I am unapologetically pro-West, pro-liberal democracies. It doesn't mean that I'm uncritical. It doesn't mean I never criticize foreign policy. And sometimes when I've had clashes with Putin apologists, one common tactic is they will come out with whataboutery. Well, what about Iraq? And it's this mindset of, well, you must agree with everything the West does. No, but I do think that when we look at the way the world is, I think that as a friend of mine put it, I would rather take the so-called chaos of the Trust government versus the so-called stability of Xi Jinping's government. Now, that's pretty much how I see things. Give me a flawed democracy any day, and we are flawed. We have serious problems any day over a totalitarian state. But that's, I can make a whole video about that subject. But I am pro-West. Um, And when I look at, someone like Jeremy Corbyn and his sort of worldview, it's alien to the way I see things. But by the same token, Donald Trump's worldview is also alien to how I see things. Just to use those two extremes. Um, One difficulty, I guess, with centrism is that it can be somewhat lonely in the sense that, I may make a video that is definitely well on the right, particularly about something like crime, or if I'm really criticizing woke ideology, people might assume, oh, well, this guy must be a conservative, he must be a right winger. And yes, it probably is a conservative position to do that, although I think many reasonable left wing people also see wokeism for what it is. But regardless, so then I might get conservatives who come along and say, oh, well, we agree with this guy, he's right. But then I'll make another video that disappoints them because it's more to the left, and they almost feel like it's a personal betrayal. Now, I'm not saying this has happened necessarily on my channel, I'm talking more broadly. If you assume a position, um, people will then associate you with that position. But what I always caveat this with is this is how I feel about this subject. I never call myself a socialist or a conservative. Um, Although I'm conservative on crime and I'm fine admitting that. To be honest, I didn't used to. I used to say, oh, well, a true liberal would take this. But really, I am a conservative on crime and may as well say that. I'm not a socialist on any area. However, I do think perhaps one area I'd be more to the left. I do think there is something fundamentally wrong about big, powerful energy companies like Shell. Today it was announced that they had massive profits. I think there should be a windfall tax. Now, if the new Prime Minister goes for that, I think it would be politically savvy. If he doesn't, he will just go into the stereotype that he's out of touch. It's one thing about the Conservative Party. Well, let me just address the two main things that put me off the two political persuasions. And I wasn't going to make this overtly party political, but these things do come into party politics regardless. So, on the left, um, it's identity politics, primarily. I mean, I really dislike the left's attitude to crime. I'm not against rehabilitation, but I believe in punishment. I do not believe it's punitive. I believe it's fair. And I really have a problem with those predominantly on the left who they get into this sort of mode where they hear about a crime and they hear people like me calling for justice, and they immediately get on this sort of defensive situation of, well, punishment's punitive. Is it not better to rehabilitate them? And my response to that is rehabilitation certainly has merit. You don't want a situation where it's a constant cycle, but it must come after the consequences, which is punishment. You cannot have a situation where someone has hurt society and they're not paying a price for that, because then you have anarchy. Um, and so I have a problem with the left wing mentality of rehabilitation first before even having punishment. I mean, there are left wing people out there, and I'm not generalizing here. I'm saying there's some left wing people who really do have this attitude to crime that it's punitive to punish people. So let's just let dangerous, violent criminals walk free, regardless of what they've done, regardless of the suffering they've caused. That burglars, rapists, gang members just not face consequences for what they've done. That, to be honest, infuriates me, that sort of mindset, because I think it is evasive. I think it's totally inconsiderate of the victims. But I don't think it actually serves as a deterrent, because if criminals are not facing consequences for what they have done, it sends out the message, particularly with young offenders, that it's fine, keep doing it. or it enables them because they think, oh, well, I just got a tap on the wrist, so I'll do it again. That's why I believe in tough punishment, not just for the sake of it, but because it actually serves a purpose. Um, on the issue of identity politics, this is another thing that really puts me off the left. Their promotion of ideas like critical race theory, I think is utterly, utterly toxic. You know, I remember when I saw groups like Hope Not Hate, which in Britain is an anti-racism organisation. At least that's how they style themselves. And they have had a lot of work against far-right groups. Fine, they have a good record in that. But they're not consistent. They say they're about tackling hate, but they're utterly silent when it comes to Islamist hate. Now, what I really abhor about the left is their lack of consistency. This sort of left-wing thinking, I should say. Again, I don't want to generalize, but they'll say things that we're against hate, we're for progress, we're against bullying. Yet simultaneously, woke activists will turn a blind eye to Islamist hate because that would mean talking about basically a minority group. Um, despite that being an ultra conservative ideology. And they will say that if conservatives and centrists talk about that, it's dog whistle politics. I despise the weaponizing of race in the sense that it's become far, far too easy to accuse people of racism. Now, there are racist mindsets out there. I think the guy that phoned up LBC the other day, I do think that was a racist mindset, saying that Sunak's not British, despite the fact he was born in this country. I do believe that's a racist mindset. So I don't equivocate on calling racism out when it's there. But I think the left, they do weaponize it. And the problem with critical race theory is it's this never-ending dystopian worldview whereby any struggles that minority people face must be the fault of the white establishment, and it's this constant victimhood narrative. I don't think that helps people. I really don't. It's not to say that there is no problems. That would be naive and it would be wrong. I think critical race theory is toxic. I think that what we're seeing now with trans dogma and militant trans activism is utterly absurd. Well, we see a group like Mermaids, a trans lobby group, which literally is enabling young girls to get mastectomies. Young girls. Now, I think there needs to be pushback against that. Again, this is something that's predominantly on the left, not 100% on the left, but predominantly on the left. Militant trans activism. I'm not attacking trans people. I'm saying that there is a militant trans activism out there that is extremely intolerant. It's promoting some dangerous messages, particularly when it's aimed at children. I reject the very idea of trans children because you cannot legally transition till you're 18. And there's a basic premise that if you're not old enough to consent to having sex, how can you be old enough to consent to changing your sex? This is just common sense. So I think the left's promotion of this sort of thing is very concerning, but particularly their attitude to race, the whole way that Black Lives Matter went about things and so on, I think it's very, very divisive. That's what I dislike about the left. But what I mistrust about the right? Well, there is a certain conservative attitude, which is basically this stoicism, this sort of survival of the fittest mindset. Now, that might be controversial, and I can already imagine people getting offended by that. So let me just quantify what I might mean by this. I think individual conservatives are decent people. I think that they will give money to charity. I think they will, in many cases, have their heart in the right place. But I do think there is a mentality in conservative thinking whereby it's sort of this thing of, well, I've done well, so anyone can. And it's kind of this idealistic view of the world that there isn't struggles out there, that people don't face discrimination or they aren't struggling. Someone who is being to job interview after job interview and they've been rejected for whatever reason, maybe they don't have the experience or whatever it is. But there is unfairness in this world and there is discrimination. I think we as a country have improved greatly. I do think that has to be recognised. The left has to recognise that. But I do have a problem with this conservative attitude of basically the stiff upper lip or the stoicism of well, I could do it, so anyone can. And the problem with that is it sometimes means there's an empathy deficit. So too many conservatives have this mindset that if someone, for example, is unemployed, oh, well, they must just be lazy. I mean, if you look at the whole attitude to welfare, it's very much like if someone's getting money from the state, well, they need to earn it. They need to. So it's almost this penalizing attitude. If someone's been made redundant or they're unemployed for whatever reason, that's the status they're in. But it's I don't think they should be criminalized. And of course, conservatives will say, "Oh, they're not being criminalised." But the whole narrative, the whole way that conservatives talk about this, it's quite demeaning. I mean, at the moment, we have a situation of sanction culture at the DWP. So people, through no fault of their own, are often sanctioned. They lose money. They're penalised, sometimes at the drop of a hat. I think, conservatives talk about something for nothing culture, but there's a sanction culture at the DWP. It's far, far too easy to sanction claimants. Way too easy. Now, I understand there are people who abuse the system, and that's wrong. And they should be punished. They're committing fraud. They should be punished. But to give an example, my younger sister has serious health problems. Now, she had an interview with the DWP. She waited and waited. They just didn't phone. At the time that was allocated, they just didn't phone. And they phoned later, and then they tried to claim that she didn't show up to the interview and actually threatened to penalise her. My mum was furious. My mum is basically her carer, and she remonstrated with them, and it got solved. But that sort of thing is happening far too much, and it has to change. Treating people basically like criminals, not giving them the benefit of the doubt, threatening letters through the post. Um, and some job centre advisors, I'm not going to generalise, I've had mixed responses myself, but some of them basically just look down on people, and they do talk down to claimants, and they're very quick to say respect our staff, but they don't all respect claimants, so it should be a two-way street. I'm going to wrap this up quite soon, but anyway, I mention that because it's the Conservative Party who very much push that sanction culture. I remember the Tory campaigns in the early 2010s under David Cameron when it was "We are on the side of strivers, not skivers," and it was quite a cynical way of turning the public against itself in that sense. I think sometimes conservatives lack basic empathy. Homeless people, they feel, oh well, they must just be drug addicts, or immigration. Now, I want controls, but I've seen conservative attitudes that basically dehumanize migrants. Now, if they're coming to this country illegally, that's wrong. And of course, we're a small country. We have to have controls. And despite what the left think, it is not dog whistle politics or racist to say so. But I've seen this mentality when there's been disasters on the Mediterranean, 40 migrants drown. I've seen people laughing about it, hard right wingers say, oh, well, that's 40 rapes prevented, and things like this. It's a real dehumanizing attitude, and I have a big problem with that. Um, Another thing about the right I dislike is okay, I've mentioned the intolerance of wokeism, and I've always disliked political correctness. Having said that, I think sometimes conservatives will use this as a kind of cover just to defend unpleasantness and bullying. As an example, I saw a post yesterday about Halloween costumes that are problematic. Now, obviously, it came from a left wing source. I don't entirely agree with it. However, one of the costumes was about Anne Frank. Now, my question is, why would someone want to dress like that? You know, a famous young girl who died in the Holocaust. Is that really appropriate for a Halloween costume? I mean, I don't agree with being provocative for provocative sake. And I do think that things can be in bad taste. And I think some conservatives kind of hide behind this critique of political correctness to basically just be dicks and just be, sorry for the language, but just to be unpleasant. And sometimes there is a lack of empathy. I mean, this country's come a long way in a lot of areas. I think we've also got better understanding of mental health. But again, that's an area. This idea of pulling yourself together, and I'm not saying it's just conservatives who have that attitude, but um, I think their track record is not the most sympathetic. And conservatives might get offended and say, "Oh, but I'm empathetic. I do." Yeah, as individuals, I am talking about the Conservative Party, and I'm talking about the ideology of, pull yourself together. This was very much one of the more unattractive aspects of Thatcherism. It was very much like you're on your own, pretty much. It can be quite heartless. Um, so I do think that that's a problem with conservatism. You know, Compassionate conservatism, one nation conservatism, there's definitely something in that. Whether Sunak's going to be of that school of thought or not, time will tell. But yeah, time will tell. I don't think, by the way, the fact that he's super wealthy necessarily means he's incapable of compassion, but he cannot directly understand someone's struggles. What he can do as Prime Minister is enact policies that will help people. Otherwise, they'll lose the next election. But anyway, that is pretty much my politics at the moment. If I was to sum myself up, I'm pretty much, if you've watched the video this far, thank you. I would say I'm a pretty regular British guy. I'm patriotic. I love my country. I'm wary of ultranationalism. My politics are centre ground. I'm conservative on crime. I'm more left wing on other areas. And yeah, I just want a stable functioning government. I want fairness in society. I do think there needs to be serious overhauls of some institutions. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a radical. Um, that's me. If anyone wants to ask any questions, please fire away. I certainly haven't addressed everything here. That's broadly speaking my outlook and my position. Anyway, thanks for watching and thanks a lot for your support for my channel.